Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 7th GLDS Symposium. Today, we are very happy to have a symposium on present updates about R&D subsector for global dental, medical, and healthcare leaders. Professor Claudia C Cotca, DDS, MPH, is an internationally recognized lecturer, USA expert with ADA, SCDP, AAMI, ANISI, ISO, IEC, ITU, AFDO, healthcare analyst, dentist, and toxicologist, founder of various ventures in private and public health, with expertise in innovation of clinical protocols, medical devices, global laser technology, clinical applications, and oral systemic axes, global health sector intelligence, and healthcare policy and expert witness before USA Congress and White House. She is appointed at rank of professor at Liberty University School of Health Sciences and international research collaborator with Dental Research Center using conventional and alternative technologies, Victor Babeș University of Medicine and Pharmacy, Timișoara, Romania. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Cotca to tell us more about the R&D subsector and GLDS updates as well.
Very good. Thank you so much, Christa, for that. Christa Serban, as you know, is the DDS candidate coming to us from Victor Babeș University of Medicine and Pharmacy in Timișoara, Romania. She's actually also the GLDS Global Ambassador and has done a stellar job in recruiting as well as leading the scope and mission of GLDS globally. We have close to, I would say, 70 ambassadors, close to 70 ambassadors. And so we are thrilled to honor her accomplishments and, of course, further promote and support her endeavors in supporting each of you as well as GLDS members and, of course, the experts at large. And of course, she's also an intern with the Washington Institute for Dentistry Laser Surgery. And today we have an intersect essentially on the basics of one of the subsectors that we've been discussing that GLDS, of course, promotes in terms of addresses not only the educational elements or the components and constituents elements within the actual subject matter, but also specifically bringing close to enhancing the leadership skills necessary to conduct and transact within that particular subsector for leadership experts, subject matter experts who wish to, of course, and do participate in the healthcare sector and take leadership roles in their geo position, but also globally. We would like to, of course, welcome our GLDS ambassadors as well as GLDS members at large. Membership is complimentary, and this information comes to you through the essentially oath that we take as experts to share information that is absolutely crucial for subject matter experts to participate at the leadership position in the geo position jurisdictions they find themselves, irrespective of the subsector component or participants that transact in the healthcare sector. With that said, we're going to jump right in. And of course, it was already announced that this is just the present update on the R&D subsector for global dental, medical, healthcare leaders. We, of course, are present both on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. However, we do transact in project-oriented leadership style. And so for those of you who've already had the experience to engage in that, I know you're doing very well, and you're basically taking leadership C-level suite positions and essentially tracking exponentially. And of course, for those who are interested, please do get in contact with Christa to coordinate your participation in that particular platform. And I would say that this is what feature that makes this platform a very unique platform as opposed to, or in comparison to other leadership platforms for healthcare sector subject matter experts and in leadership training. I like to just highlight that this particular starting of series is going to focus on the more basic aspect of the information, if you will. And so with that, I like to just note and list here disclosures. There are various different disclosures that are involved, as you well know. We're going to really focus very intricately, I would say, and quickly on the starting of tackling this particular interesting R&D aspect within the healthcare sector, which is the research and development side. We're going to look at the function, and of course, mind you, this is a surface scratch. This is not an in-depth detailed component, but it is a comprehensive mention. We're going to, of course, incorporate a reference to the participants as well as the R&D requirements, irrespective of the geo position. And we're going to look at past, present, and future considerations. And so, as I like to pursue through the aspect of the subject matter, mind you, we're having a 360 view, both in micro and macro views. We know that various different sectors that we've already mentioned in lectures or symposiums, as well as in discussions and projects, incorporate the private public health experts. Of course, those are the leaders, the core scientists, the clinicians, experts. The other subsector is academia, R&D, industry, regulatory, legislation, government, business, consumers, media, and the legal subsectors. Today, we will be focusing on the R&D, the research and development side. And so with that, allow me to just, here we go. Here we go. Wonderful. Bring your attention to two main perspectives and two main, I would say, categories. Typically, the R&D segment or subsector is almost always thought of as incorporating academia, industry, or private sector. However, the R&D component, which is oftentimes bypassed and not even recognized, but actually contributes the majority and the large aspect of contribution to the R&D sector, is the private sector component of clinical practice. I'm going to highlight this again. The one element that gets bypassed when considering R&D research, whether it's at the elemental level, whether the translational level, or clinical trials levels, the private healthcare sector, meaning clinical practice as well as larger entities, but at the actual consumer platform reference, meaning the doctor-patient relationship, the doctor-patient transaction, the doctor-patient vector. That is one of the most prominent, actually the most prominent contributory element which R&D actually takes place in. And so as we look at all the segments, if you will, that R&D takes functionality in or takes place in, I like to just, I like the 360 view renders a 360 view. The y-axis, if you can visualize a macro to micro scale rendition and variation, the x-axis would represent the concept, logic, and data acquisition balance. Data is as good as the concept logic, and concept logic is as good as data. And the z-axis really looks at depth, and particularly depth of time. And so that said, the verticals and the horizontals and the z-axis of the, let's say, basic research, core scientific research, chemistry, physics, etc., nano scale, or translational or clinical research incorporates, of course, the medical devices, the clinical protocols, precision medicine, which is the clinician patient transaction or rendition of services and treatment, and of course also the therapeutic toxicity index or the balance thereof. However, the industry component and academia and even, for instance, some regulatory bodies or consumer platforms participate in leadership format as well as recipient format in the R&D component, which needs to be incorporated in the larger scope view, and also, of course, specifically be adaptable to the micro view that we, of course, seek out to highlight or to incorporate in not only the analysis stage, but also the examination stage later of interpretation of data values. And so another look at this, when we look at oral systemic protocols, of course, we are here speaking heavily on the dental medicine science side, clinical and research, but the oral systemic extension, again, will incorporate the academic R&D component as a wheel of movement and pressure points within the standards aspects, as well as the legislation policy. And of course, that funnels into the educational and the academic from a perspective of educational, but there is renditions of coverage, if you will, that interface in the other subsectors in ways that need to be mentioned. And of course, this is geoposition customized. And so when we go now here and we deal with, very specific, let's say, examples of let's say, dentistry, oral systemic conditions. We have, of course, the laboratory side. We have, of course, the clinical protocol side. We have a balance of therapeutics, of indices that needs to be measured on the therapeutic index side and toxicity side. This is, for instance, a slide from my presentation at the International Association of Dental Research in China 2022 in the keynote presentation that took place in the pharmacology, therapeutics, and toxicology group. And so that said, the other insightful extension then, of course, takes great deal of reflection in the R&D perspective when dealing with R&D, when participating with R&D, when initiating R&D, and when applying R&D data or conclusions, parlay into the specifics of when we look at clinical toxicity as adverse effects, rendering, of course, the comorbidities aspect, looking at host deficiencies to host burdens, and then, of course, taking that to a greater extent from private health to public health transition spectrums. So when we look at clinical outcome phenotypes, as clinicians, we understand that it is in function of the therapeutic index, meaning the positive impact, and of course the toxicity index, which is the liability and host host burden, host deficiency reflection of the pressure point of liability, and all the metrics that contribute include, of course, the genetics, the environment, exogenous both and endogenous stimulants. More simply stated, the identification of correct disease assessment approach coming from an oral systemic axis and the identification of the appropriate technology will, of course, increase the clinical outcomes in differentiated phenotypes. And I know that many of you, including Christa, have been participating in various different presentations that goes in much more in depth in this. Mind you, I want you to have the XYZ analysis perspective that we discussed a little bit earlier in terms of the R&D when we look to evaluate, rate, and prioritize the assessment opportunity for logic concept development so that data is as accurate as possible. We do not live in a perfect world, and we are in a continuum of change and modification. And that, of course, occurs in this aspect of precision medicine that really translates as accurate only during the actual customization opportunity between patient and doctor. And so the impression should be that when you take a 360 micro-macro viewpoint with the specificity of the concept logic requirement for data collective and data application and data interpretation in function of time, then we can certainly protect, and I highlight here, protect and ensure longitudinal stability of population health and specifically in reducing comorbidities. And hence, in this sense, private health is public health. And those of you who have joined me and worked with me have heard me say this cyclically throughout the years. This is really an extension to the public health auspices in terms of the rendition of the selection of protocols, but and the selection of technologies, but those aspects are very much rooted in the R&D components and R&D platforms. And that said, we're back to again just visualizing again what I've asked to take in consideration, that 360 screen type or filter, if you will, in terms of the metrics when looking or when thinking of R&D initiatives or R&D translational opportunities or R&D data applications. And knowing that while, yes, academia and other subsectors do incorporate, including the R&D sector, incorporate the academic sector or the industry sector that is very present in the R&D subsector. The private sector, which is the private clinical sectors, depending on whatever market, open versus closed market, and of course the public health community extensions presence that again participate in the rendition of patient care and precision medicine, which occurs between the clinician and the patient. And so with that, I'd like to just again highlight the importance that this particular, I would say, focus was to really identify the nuts and bolts, the core elements that parlay into what the subsector R&D really ought to incorporate comprehensively, and and also the functionality of what it can bring to the essential contributions of individual and also public and population health, as well as the participants in the R&D sector and the requirements. And this is, as I mentioned before, it was a barely surface brush stroke of mention, with, of course, subsequent symposiums on more specific dialect, if you will. And I hope that the presentations of the illustrations of the examples in the clinical sense, rendered a specific delineation of what can be applied and how interpretational opportunities could be paralleled and of course accentuated and incorporated from the early stages of the research and development side, whether it's the industry working on technology, whether it's the academic side working on the clinical protocol, of course, and not ignoring the more larger contributor, which comes from the clinical practice sector side and the public health sector side, which is the patient-doctor transaction. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your attention. We will now go to Q&A, and with this, our recording session has ended.